Good morning, students of Algebra 2. Today we have factoring review day 2. Yesterday we talked about factoring out a GCF, or a greatest common factor. So when we're factoring, we always go through a process. The first thing we look for is the GCF. Right, so we always look there first. And then today we're going to talk about factoring trinomials where the leading coefficient is a 1. So like this example here, see the leading coefficient, the number in front of the squared term, that is going to be 1. So a little review, if we multiply binomials, how would you do this? Well, how many times does he get distributed? Once, twice. So what is x times x? X squared. What is x times positive 3? 3x. And then you move on to the next one. So what is that 4? What is 4 times x? Positive 4x. What is 4 times 3? Positive 12. And then we get our like terms together. So x squared, 3x's plus 4x, plus 7x, plus 12. So remember, factoring is just multiplying in reverse. So if we multiply to go this way, to factor, we're going to start here and go that way. Okay? So how would you do this one? Well, let's think about it. We know that whatever this times this is has to multiply to make that first term. What's the only thing to multiply by itself to make x squared? It's got to be x and x. And then these two numbers here, whatever they are, they need to multiply to make a 12. But two things got to happen. They got to multiply to make a 12. So first of all, let's list some factors of 12. What can we do? 1 times 12, 2 times 6, 3 times 4. So two conditions need to be met. They need to multiply to make this, which these all do. So how do I know if it's going to be 1 and a 12, or a 2 and a 6, or a 3 and a 4? Well, the other condition is they need to add or subtract to make this number. Can a 1 and a 12 ever add or subtract to make a 7? No, if you add them, it's 13. You subtract them, it's 11. So those are out. How about 2 and a 6? 2 plus 6 is 8. 6 minus 2 is 4. No. How about a 3 and a 4? Well, yeah, if you add them up, that makes a 7. So I know it's got to be a 3 and a 4. And then I think about the signs. We know that this number, the 3 times the 4, has to make a positive 12. Well, how do you multiply two numbers and make a positive? Only if they're both positive or if they're both negative. So how do I know if it's going to be negative 3 times negative 4 or a positive 3 times a positive 4? Well, those two numbers need to add to make the middle one. So they multiply to make this one, they need to add to make the middle one. So positive 3 and positive 4 makes 7, so that checks. And positive 3 times positive 4 makes 12. So we'll see a lot of examples if that didn't make sense. So remember, this is all review. And could we always check our work to make sure it checks out? Yep, just like we did in the beginning. We'll go back and get our original. Alright, so let's look at some examples here. Remember, when the leading coefficient is 1, these are the easy ones. And go straight to your answer. So make two binomials. What's the only things multiply to make n squared? N times n. And then what are some factors of 30? We got 1, 30, 2, 15, 3 and 10. What else? 5 and 6. Okay. Now these all multiply to make 30. So how do you know which one? Well, they need to add or subtract to make this. Can these add or subtract to make that? No. Okay, but now we have two options here. How do I know if it's going to be a 2 and a 15 or a 3 and a 10? Because those can both make a 13 somehow. So here's how you figure it out. They need to multiply to make positive 30. So it's either got to be a plus plus or a minus minus, right? So let's look at this one. If these were both positive, a positive 2 times positive 15 does make positive 30, but what would that add to? A 17. What do we want? 13. What if it was minus minus? Well, yeah, that would multiply to make positive 30. But what would they add to? A negative 17. So I want them to add to make a positive 13. So obviously it's got to be this one. So the only question is it going to be a negative 3 times a negative 10 or a positive 3 times a positive 10? Well, what's negative 3 plus a negative 10? Well, that'd be negative 13. What do we want? Positive 13. So that means they both got to be positive, and then 3 and 10. And of course, you can distribute and you're going to get your original. So remember, for factoring, you can always multiply your factors at the end to check to see if you got the original. Alright, let's go a little faster now. What times what makes x squared, or k squared? It's got to be k and k. Notice for all these, when the leading coefficient's 1, it's always just the variable times itself. So that part's easy. And what are the only numbers to multiply to make a 3? No, 1 and 3. Now I think about the signs. They got to multiply to make positive 3, so it's either going to be a negative 1 times negative 3 or a positive 1 times a positive 3. It's got to be one of those two combinations. But they need to add to a positive 4. What does a positive 1 and a positive 3 add to a positive 4? Checks out. Okay, since the leading coefficient's 1, I can go straight to my answer. It's got to be n times n. What are the only things multiply to make a 5? 1 and 5. Now you might say, well, that's not a positive 5, it's a negative 5. So if this times this, after I give them their signs, got to make a negative, what does that tell you? That means one of them has to be negative, one has to be positive. So whenever it's mix and match, one positive, one negative, and you're trying to figure out which one gets it, remember doing this? We look at this sign right here, and it goes with the bigger one or smaller one. Always goes with the bigger number. So whatever the sign is, goes with the bigger number when it's a mix and match. 1 plus 1 minus. So who's bigger, 1 or 5? 5. So he gets that sign. And let's double check. N times n squared. N times 5 plus 5n. Negative 1 times n, negative 1n. Negative 1 times 5, negative 5. So I get n squared plus 4n minus 5. Checks out because I get my original. Okay, leading coefficient's 1. Go straight to your answer. What times what makes n squared? It's got to be n and n. Factors of 50. Okay, let's list them. What do we got? 1, 50, 2, 25. What else we got? 5 and 10. Okay. So which ones can add or subtract to make a negative 5? No, no. So it's got to be these. So I'm going to put the 5 and the 10 in there. Now I think about the signs. They got to multiply to make a negative. Which means one of these has to be negative, because this thing times this guy over here, he has to make a negative 50. So how do we decide when it's mix and match who gets plus, who gets minus? Well, you look at this sign right here, and it always goes with the bigger or smaller number. Always goes with the bigger number. So the negative goes with that, which means this has to be a plus. And you could always multiply it out to check your work. Okay, on the back side, so what do we have here? What times what makes x squared? Well, it's got to be x times x. And what times what makes a 56? So I'm going to save some time instead of listing all the factors. I know 7 times 8 makes 56. Now I know one's got to be plus, one's got to be minus. How do we decide which one gets plus, which one gets minus? This sign goes with the bigger number. Okay, because doesn't a 8 take away 7 make a positive 1? And doesn't negative 7 times a positive 8 make a negative 56? Because remember, these two numbers need to multiply to make this, add to make this one. In this case, it's a positive 1. Okay, so we have what times what makes k squared? It's got to be k in k. Let's save some time. Factors of 60 that can add to a 16. Well, I think 6 times 10 makes 60. And 6 plus 10 makes 16. So they got to multiply to make a positive, so it's either going to be a minus and a minus or a plus and a plus. But when I add them, it has to be positive 16, which means they both need to be a plus. Alright, well that is it for the review. Your homework, you have 6 problems tonight. So if you get stuck, remember these videos, you can always go back and rewind it. Alright, unlike a physical lecture where we're in class, you can pause it, rewind it, take a little break and come back. But, we don't have the ability to ask the teacher a question in real time, but remember, during the day I'll be at my computer, so you can always write me an email or communicate through Google Classroom if you're not sure how to do a problem, and I will respond as quick as I can and help you out. Alright, and then as always, take a picture of your work, upload it to Google Classroom. Most of you have been doing great. Keep it up, and we will see you tomorrow. Have a great day.